this is the Provoked Prawn, and this is the Intel Arc A770. This is Intel's flagship graphics card, and an interesting entry into the market which is currently dominated by AMD and Nvidia. And this is an affordable GPU that I purchased because I wanted to see how it would fit in a budget build. So I've done a video recently on a budget gaming PC, and I wanted to use this in there to see how it performed. And I was really intrigued by it and struck by actually how good it is for the money, because it is remarkably affordable when you compare it with Nvidia and AMD's offerings. It is a staggeringly affordable card, which most reviewers will tell you will give you a good 1080p experience, with some caveats that it doesn't work with older games as well. I'm going to give you my experiences with it, which includes some 4K gaming, which I was really surprised that it managed to do that at this price point, delivering actually a smooth-ish experience with 4K. So I'm going to show you some benchmark and some real-world tests later on. But the A770 is also interesting for a number of other reasons, including AV1 encoding, which I'll talk a bit more about later on. You'll also see that it has 3 DisplayPort connections and an HDMI connection. I'm going to leave all the specs in the description, as well as 8-pin PCIe and 6-pin, so you've got 2 connectors there. But you'll also notice there's an RGB connection, so it's a little tiny cable next to those that needs to be plugged in, and then that connects up to the USB connection on your motherboard to then give you control over the RGB lighting. And it does actually have some nifty RGB lighting, which looks pretty nice in the case as the final finished result. But it is standard PCIe connections, so there's no danger of catching fire like certain other graphics cards have been doing recently, or at least smoking a lot. And the cabling is fairly straightforward. The RGB placement is a bit of a pain because it's not that easy to make look tidy. But that's a small point, and it is a really nice looking card. Now, this is a limited edition, which is essentially equivalent to Nvidia's Founders Edition cards, except obviously this is an Intel card with its own styling. Now, there is meant to be other partnership cards available, and at this point, the Arc is only available in the UK from one store, so it's not particularly like flooding the market in terms of where you can buy it from. And that might limit the options of purchases, but it is still really affordable, as I said, and that is the main draw in my mind. And it also offers up some interesting competition, which will hopefully in future mean that if Intel keeps plodding away at this and keeps improving both the drivers and the hardware, that we should see a better bit of competition from Intel, which should then maybe get AMD and Nvidia paying attention and hopefully reducing the prices over all of their GPUs, because things are getting a bit out of hand lately. But here you can see it installed in the budget machine. This is an NZXT H7 case, which I built in with some pretty affordable parts, including the graphics card. But you'll see it has this nice RGB strip on it and then some RGB lighting on the underside. Now, I've built this PC for a viewer, and I'm going to do a video on that separately. And I've done a guide on how to build a machine like this, if you're interested, and I'll leave that information in the description. But you can see once it's finished, and even with the tinted glass panel on, you can still see that RGB lighting shining through. Now, I had, coincidentally, a friend coming to visit, and we were playing Escape from Tarkov. He was on this machine, and I was on my own. And it was only after he'd finished playing, after we'd stopped playing, that I realised that I'd given him a 4K monitor, and the machine was connected to that. So what you're seeing here is actually Tarkov being played in 4K. His experience was smooth, and I wanted to check that I was happy with the experience of it as well. And as you can see, the visuals are really nice. This is on 4K and reasonably high graphics settings as well, and yet it's delivering a really smooth experience. Now, I didn't have an FPS counter on, so you can't see what the FPS is at the moment, but I was actually impressed for a start that you could even run at 4K for this price and to get a smooth experience. So I was really surprised. So what I wanted to do then was to basically test a variety of other games to check and see whether that experience would be the same across the board. So I've gone in and I've done some benchmark testing with built-in benchmarks, but also sort of real-world experiences. So you can see Forza Horizon 5 here, for example. This is a standard benchmark that's running. Now, I tweaked various different settings, and I tried it both in 4K and 1080p to see what the experience would be like. And a lot of the shots that you're actually going to see now are at 4K, so 4K graphics with maximum sort of settings on them. Obviously, you're not going to get the smoothest experience doing this. And it also will vary wildly from game to game, as I was about to show you. So don't go in buying this card expecting that you're going to be able to run games at maximum settings. You can see when you run this benchmark, for example, that Forza suggests that we should be running the graphics on the lowest setting. But it also got 76 FPS, and that's on high settings on 4K at 60 Hz refresh rate as well, as you can see from the score. So 76 FPS on Forza isn't too shabby. So now I was doing some real world testing with it as well, because sometimes those benchmarks don't give you that true experience. And I wanted to just get in there and play around with it. And a dust storm conveniently rolled in, which I thought would be a great little test to see how the performance handled it. And again, you can see it's nice and smooth, and it's got a good experience going on here. I've also got an FPS counter in the top left because I wanted to keep an eye on how it was handling things and how well it was doing. And again, not a bad result out of it. We're getting in the high 80s, low 90s from the FPS counter, and a really smooth experience from this too. So again, surprised and impressed. Now obviously you could go into 1080p or 1440p and get a much better experience. And also you probably need to play around with the graphics quite a bit in order to optimize it and get it the way you want it. And it's going to vary depending on what panel you're using and other things. Obviously, next test would be something a bit more bonkers. So Cyberpunk 2077. Now, Cyberpunk is a highly punishing game that has been updated recently in a number of different ways and improved. And you'll see it also has AMD's Fidelity Super Resolution 2.1 as an option, which you can run on Intel graphics cards. So there's potential to be able to turn that on to theoretically improve things. But you'll also see that I've left ray tracing on as well. Now, you see when I'm running the benchmark, you get FPS counter on it. And with these settings on, I'm getting 27 FPS, which is obviously painfully low. Now, this didn't really surprise me because when Cyberpunk first launched, I was using my 2080 Ti at that time, and it was pretty low FPS then, even on the sort of not high-end settings, even at 1440p. So I wasn't particularly surprised to see 4K struggling with this GPU in this game, so it's fair enough. But you do have the option, obviously, to run at 4K, but with the graphics settings perhaps turned down a bit. So rather than being on high, you could be on lower settings. You could turn ray tracing off, for example, and you can turn the Fidelity Super Resolution on to performance mode. And maybe in the future, once Intel's XeSS technology, which is an alternative to DLSS and Fidelity, once that starts rolling out a bit more and we see more of it, then you might get better results out of this game and a few others as well. So I think there's room for improvement, but you can see a mixed result in a number of different ways here. Obviously, you can see that it's saying the max FPS was 32 on this run. That's with Fidelity turned off, so there's no super resolution on that one. And DLSS is obviously not even an option because it's not an NVIDIA graphics card. But again, I ran in to do it in a sort of a real world experience. So this is me just driving around in the various different views of it. And again, you can see pretty decent, not brilliant, obviously mid-20s, 30s, 40 FPS, not that smooth, but it really is going to depend on your personal preference. Now, Dirt 5. And this is another game that isn't that punishing, so it's pretty accessible. And I am trying to run it on a higher settings there, as you can see. And now I'm getting 50-ish FPS on there out of the benchmark tests. So it's at about 50 average FPS on that. And that's with the graphics sort of middling setup. Now, some of the older games, it's worth bearing in mind, will struggle with it, and this is a known issue, and I think that's worth mentioning. So if you are going to buy this card and then play a lot of older games, you might have a problem. DX9 games particularly are meant to be problematic. This is actually one of the Tomb Raider games, and you can see it's set to DX12, but I've also had to change the settings slightly. So it is at 4K, but when I tried to run it on the highest settings, I was getting the low sort of 10, 20 FPS, and it was really jaggedy. You can even see here, actually, I've turned the graphics down a little bit, and it's still struggling. This is a really good looking game, and it can be quite punishing, to be fair, but that's worth keeping in mind. Now, I did tweak those settings a little bit, and still at 4K, but lower visuals, then getting somewhere in the 60 FPS mark. So it is possible to get fairly decent results out of this. This is only a 60 Hz refresh rate monitor anyway, 4K 60 Hz. So there's nothing too crazy to be worrying about there. Now a bit of Dying Light 2, and again, another game, recent game, which actually ran really smoothly, and that was definitely playable. And again, you can see what the FPS count is on that. So the overall experience has actually been a really good one. I was surprised, frankly, that it can manage 4K in so many different games and to deliver a pretty smooth overall experience while doing so. If you run a 1080p monitor, you'll probably get a lot better experience out of it, and you might be able to run 1080p on the higher settings as well. I thought it was worth showing, sort of punishing it with 4K just to show what was possible, and then obviously you got the option of lowering that and getting even higher FPS, as you've seen, sometimes pushing into the 70s, 80s, 90s, and probably above if you've got the right settings for it. So surprisingly good, and we're pleased with it. A good purchase for the money. This is actually a very good competitor, and one that I would certainly recommend if you're looking to make something that's a bit more affordable. The other thing that makes this interesting is the AV1 encoding. This is a setting that you can use in OBS, and in future it will be available for both streaming and recording purposes, and it gives you a better performance when capturing footage. So if you're a content creator that's looking to capture gameplay and to create high quality videos, you should actually find that this encoding puts less pressure on your system, and that way you can get a good balance of FPS but also good quality videos. So that's one to watch out for and to Google around and find out more about as well. So this card, it also has that benefit, so keep that in mind. So all told, a brilliant option. Hopefully you found this video useful. Let me know in the comments if you've got any questions. Check out the description for more information and watch the budget build guide. This has been the Provoked Prawn. Thanks for watching. This has been the Provoked Prawn. Hope you found this video useful, interesting, hilarious, or otherwise. Take a look at these other videos that I think you might find interesting as well. And have a look at the description for links and other information you might find useful. Click that join button to see the benefits of being a member of my YouTube channel. And most importantly, have a great life.